In this video, I'll discuss resizing elements in transition. Now, I've got a basic web page here with some columns and then a picture, and it's a very large picture, so you can see we really don't see the whole picture, we're just seeing part of it. And if I go ahead and resize the width of the screen, you can see that actually, even though the columns are changing, we've got 2 columns now instead of 3, that image is still pretty big. And then I go to the smallest size that, once again, we're not really getting that responsiveness. We're seeing the full image, but it's not really looking very good. What we need to be able to do here is actually make these objects respond the way we want them to. I'm going to go to our code. And let's take a look at the CSS. Now, the first thing I want to look at is the wrapper. If you're not familiar with what a wrapper is, it's an invisible container that holds all your page objects together. It wraps around them. And what I want to do for this is actually start by giving it a width. And we're going to use a relative width, 100 VW. So that's the entire width of the screen, the viewport width. Remember, one viewport width is 1%, so 100 is 100%. And then what I want to do is go down to menu button, because one of the things about my design is that the menu buttons aren't really responding the way I'd like them to. You can see they are shrinking a bit, but they don't look really great. What I want to be able to do is sort of make them look better. So menu button, I'll go ahead and just change this to a width of 15%. I'm going to save this and show this to you now. Go ahead and refresh that page. And you see that there's been a little bit of a change to the menu items, but not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for here is actually to use viewport width instead. So I'll use VW instead of percentage. And I notice I've got 2 widths in here, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one. Save that. And refresh our page. And now you see the buttons are nicely spaced out. So that's one of the nice things about using responsive measurements like VW. That'll give us a nice clean look for our menu buttons. Now I also want to change the font size. Actually, it's already there, but you notice that I have a font size that's changing using VW. So again, as I resize this, you'll see the font size on those buttons change as well. So that's another way of making objects resize when you're transitioning the size of the viewport. Now, let's go down to our first media query. We have one here that's a maximum width of 800 pixels. In other words, anything smaller than 801 pixels. And this is where we start talking about smaller devices like maybe a smartphone. And the first thing I want to do is go down here, and I'm going to add a rule for image. So I've actually put some images on the page and given them a class called image. And so I'm going to create a rule for that and set the width at 35%. Now again, you can use viewport width as well. As a matter of fact, maybe I will. Maybe I'll use VW instead. And I want it to float right as well, so I want to make sure that our text wraps around the image. And we could float it left just as easily, but I'll make it right. And then let's go ahead and say padding. You want to add some padding to that as well. That sort of helps put some space around your images. And I'm actually going to change this value to 50 VWs. So it'll be 50% of the screen. Now, let's go down to the next rule. And this rule, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create let me just go ahead and copy this. And then go down to the bottom of that set of rules. And change this value, say to 35%. I'm going to float that one right as well and keep the padding at 10 pixels. And then finally our last rule, and this is for large screens. So the one I just changed is the in-between screens. And this one, I'm going to set that value at, let's make that 25 VWs. And this one I'm going to float left, and I'll leave that padding at 10 pixels. Go ahead and save that. and refresh our page. And you can see now that image has resized really nicely. Now, we probably want to use the border box around that image because you notice that it's not aligning to the left of the text. That's okay. But you can see that it's actually resized. And as we resize our viewport width, you can see that the image is resizing with it. So we're actually, as we transition the page, we're actually making that thing resize. When we get to the 2-column layout, you can see it became nice and big. And again, as we resize it, it's going to resize as well. And then finally, when we get to the smallest size, there it's floated to the right, and it's actually nice. We can actually go ahead and resize that. And the font size and the image itself will resize along with the viewport width. So that's a really great way of making sure that your elements on the page, whether they be fonts, whether they be images or other containers, resize along with the viewport. And that's a very important aspect of responsive web design.